Jamie from Inky and Scrappy, sharing with you today my Creeping on Halloween for December 2022. And this one was so much fun. I really didn't know what I was starting with. I've, been not in a very creative mood, but I did get my new ink road stamps in. So I had a bunch of pre-orders come in, and so I have been totally waiting for the Monster Mash set. I also had the Scooby-Doo set, which would also work for Halloween, but I ended up deciding to go with that Monster Mash because I might have picked up that new Tim Holtz one, or at least new to me. I think it was new this year for the 2022 Halloween season. So I did pick that one up at Simon Says Stamp, if that's one that you are interested in. It's kind of a fun set. So I am starting with some Bristol Smooth cardstock here. I knew I wanted to do some ink blending, and I decided to do a ink resist or an emboss resist technique again. It's an old tried and true, especially when it comes to sentiment style stamps. And I could have done the background inking, let it dry and set, and then just done a white emboss over the top. But there's just something about doing that ink resist that's just so much fun. So I did end up doing this one like backwards, I guess, or the hard way when it came to doing the stamping and the inking part. If I would have lined it up better, I probably could have just moved the paper up and down along the misty side and not had to go back and forth with my stamp. But I did just end up lining it up as best I could, eyeballing it and calling it good and going that route. I did do it here just to get that top one, and that top one ended up mostly getting cut off anyways because I was going to cut this down a little bit in the grand scheme of things. I probably should have hit it with another shot of that anti-static powder tool just because it kind of had a little bit of powder sticking in the one spot, which it really didn't matter because it's just the background anyways, but And then for my main image on this one, I had decided to do it on Bristol Smooth as well because I wanted to watercolor on this one. And so I just ended up using the VersaFine Onyx Black for my ink on this one and then doing that clear embossing powder over the top. I just find it works a lot better for me to do the black ink with that VersaFine Onyx Black ink as my black. I have so many issues with black embossing powder, so this one's just easier for me. And I did do the top of just his head because I wanted to make him have a little bit of dimension there, and so that was kind of how I decided to do this. And I was playing with colors on this one. I did take out the Distress spray, what is it, this mica spray stains in Decay. I was kind of hoping that if I didn't mix it, I wouldn't get all the glitz and glimmer, like it would settle down. There was still enough shimmer and shine to it, which was fine. And then I just ended up using my Distress spray stains, or in this case, these are the older ones, so they still have the dauber on top, as my coloring medium for this one. I could have used Distressed re-inkers for this as well. I just, I was grabbing what was super close, and I kind of pulled the colors from just, oh, these looked cool. And I have less colors in the Distressed spray stains, so it was easier to pick what I wanted. And of course, I'm going to go with blues and greens because I love all things blue and green. And so as I'm coloring this in, I laid down some water first. I wasn't overly concerned with getting a concentrated color on this, and you will see I end up taking my towel and basically deleting it. It just mutes, it gives me that muted tone. I just wanted a light color on this. I didn't want it to be super dark because it is supposed to be a mummy. So I didn't want him, I could have gone like an ivory color to just do the other. But to me, a mummy that's been in a crypt or in a tomb for a long amount of time is going to have, the greens and the browns and just a lot of character and color to him, like, you know, the Decay, whatever part. I'm telling you, I get into that morbid whatever. So I had decided to do the blues and the greens and the browns. And I'm pulling in from when I did these, I did a couple of years ago. I did some, Tim Holtz has, I think it was like the party, I don't want to say party people, but was it like the class reunion, Monster class reunion or something? And there was a mummy type on it. And I kind of colored it with the same, I think I used oranges and greens on that one. And I loved the look with a little bit of color, but to mute it out a lot. And so that's how I decided to color this one. So I did take from something I'd done in the past and, you know, redid it for this one. And I absolutely loved how he came out color-wise. And then for the face, I'm just going to color the face on this one because that's all I was planning on coloring or filling and cutting out anyways. And so I did do a little bit darker, I think, on the face for this one because I do want it to stand out a little bit more than the rest of the mummy in the other one. And yes, I ended up hand cutting. So I did cut out some footage, or I didn't actually even record the footage of me hand fussy cutting this out. I thought about doing the brother scan and cut, and here's the thing. The brother scan and cut, anything that's a broken line, it will go and outline the inside of that line. And there was just, the image didn't have a whole lot of solid lines, so I just ended up fussy cutting the best that I could around this one, fairly close to the actual image. And with that embossed line, you get a fairly good, it's a fairly easy cut to do. It just took some time. And then I decided to pull in a Tailored Expressions Toil and Trouble set for my vials of wicked substance, I guess. You know, if you read the Monster Mash. So I used the Monster Mash song lyrics, and they talk about in the lab, and it woke up, and so I decided, obviously, I needed some vials of scientific ooky kooky stuff to make them come to life. And so that's what these were for. And then I'm just going in with some of those leftover colors and adding in colors that match, but definitely bolder than my little mummy here. Browns for my cork tops, and then I did a very watered down blue for my actual glass bottle stuff. And yes, I'm off camera here because, you know, I was working in a 8-inch by 6-inch square because the rest of my desk is covered with stuff. I need to maybe clean it off today. Possibly. It's got to happen sooner or later here. And so mixing in some of the other colors, kind of giving them a little bit more interest. And of course, adding in that Distress Mica spray stain because the little gloss and glimmer there is, you know, all good fun. So I'm going to clean off my palette, and if you are like me and you don't like wasting distress inks of any form and or shape, and I loved these color combos, so I was like, I just went and grabbed a piece of Distress Heavy Stock, and then I'm just going to pick that up and play with it a little bit. I dried it just a little bit to get some layering. And if I would have thought about it, I probably could have done this with the background, but I always worry about, obviously my background was not on Distress Heavy Stock, so it wasn't going to work on that background like it did on my Distress Heavy Stock here, but I ended up with a pretty cool looking impromptu background that I will use at some point in time. So I just dried it down, picked up a little bit more, and gave it a go. So, you know, it's one of those, I'm here anyways. This stuff is on my desk. I might as well just use it up and give myself, you know, a future project option. I might have a whole stack of future project options for backgrounds. And then I'm going to use the coordinating dies that I have with that tailored expression set to cut out my little vials. And I'm just looking at layout wise what I want to do. And yeah, the vials might have still been wet and I might have set my thingy on top of it. So I was kind of trying to decide what I wanted for that coloring in the background, and pulling in that other panel kind of, you know, gave me a little bit of maybe what it could look like. And so I did. I just ended up using the same colors in a Distress Oxide as I did when I colored my little mummy. And so I'm using that peeled paint, vintage photo, and chip sapphire. I really enjoy using the foams for blending on cardstock, at least if you want a super heavy Distress Oxide blend. It just goes so much faster than using the makeup style brushes. I like the makeup style brushes for different looks though, so that's why I have all of the things. It gives me options. So I'm just going in with that brown on the bottom there, kind of giving the illusion of ground, and then a little bit of green to blend into that brown and then into the blue as well. And just kind of going back and forth over a little bit here. And then for the vast majority, I'm going to use that chip sapphire. Now, I didn't think this got dark enough for me. Like, I wanted it darker. And I guess if I would have used regular inks, it probably would have been darker. But I like the blend of oxides. And so, all in all, I just ended up coming in with my black Soot Distress ink blending foam. I have one that's just dedicated to black Soot Distress ink, as it's a very common one that I use. And I just ended up inking around the edges, which my camera cut off and you don't get to see it. And yeah, I was like, I looked and I was like, oh, my memory card was full. I had no clue what you actually got to see. So I am pleased to see that everything but that black soot around the outsides ended up on film. And then I'm just going to take a little bit of water and moisten my towel and then buff off that embossing powder on the top, because the ink will sit on top, and this way I get that gorgeous white text in my background here. And there is the finished background panel. And then I'm just going to cut it off to, I guess, rid you of those sides. I was just making sure that it was going to size down enough to fit on the front of an A2 decent. So I'm bringing in my Trinity Stamps stack. I think they're the modern embossed A2 stack from Trinity Stamps. And I'm just going to line this up, kind of butting it against the words or the letters on the outside there. And then I will tape this down so it stays put in my die cutting machine. And yes, the ink is still wet, so it does tend to wiggle. So I did end up putting it on both the outside and the inside, so it stayed a little bit better here. And then I will run that through. And then I needed to do a matte. And so I took out my Tim Holtz Ranger Distress stack, and I'm pretty sure these are super old. I'm pretty sure you can't get them anymore. And I just kind of picked out the two colors that I thought might go. And I ended up going with the lighter of the two. I did go back and forth. If the dark blue would have still been in the pack, it's not because I used it all. I probably would have gone with the dark blue. I like blue, but I like green too, so. And then I'm also adding in the little poison and caution, and I think the skull and crossbones from that Tailored Expression stamp set. And then for my panel, it actually stayed put fairly well, and it didn't warp a whole lot with the heat embossing on it, but I still like to put down that double-sided score tape adhesive to make sure it sticks really good. And then I will center that as best as my little eyeballs can do here. And yes, I totally biffed it on the bottom part. But that's okay. I had different ideas for my little vials of things than where I ended up placing them. But since I messed up on my placement of my panel, I just figured I would lay them down on the bottom here. And that covers up that bottom part where I had a little bit more space or real estate than I was planning. And I had thought about popping up my little creature here, my little mummy. But I realized that was going to take way too much effort and or time with some foam tape. And so I ended up sticking him behind those bottles just a teeny tiny bit and putting the bottles on top. And then, yes, I just put some heavy blocks on top because it was going to take a little bit for him to dry, and did here. And then for my little head on my mummy, I had decided to go in with a action wobbler. These were action wobblers from Hobby Lobby. I broke 2 of them before I actually got one that worked. So yes, they were a lot cheaper than the normal action wobbler, but the quality control on them was not nearly as good as the action wobblers are. So you get what you pay for, I guess, in this case. Yeah. So I did end up using some glue because I wanted to make sure it was actually going to stay this time. And then I had to not wiggle it for a while because I needed that glue to set and not actually stick together and make my action wobbler not wobble. So while I was letting that glue dry, I went in with some Glossy Accents. And yes, I did the eyeballs on my mummy. And then I proceeded to Glossy Accent each of the glass vials. It might have been a little excessive. That's okay. I tend to be a little on the excessive side anyways. And then, of course, because they had this beautiful glossy accents on them that also acts as glue, I decided I needed to add some more things to my vials here. And I was playing with a bunch of different options. So I did bring in some Crescent Creations Halloween Clay Bits Mix, which had these little, I'd say they're like sequence style spiders and little mini bats. So I put bats in my one vial. I put a spider on the outside of my other vial. And then because the orange other thingies didn't really go with, I could have used the little eyeballs, I guess. They would have been cute too. I decided to do a little bit of glitter. I didn't want to go overboard with the glitter, and I did 2 different types of glitter. So this one is a holographic style glitter, and then I ended up with some rock candy for my other ones. So just trying to keep the glitter on the individual bottles and not kind of getting it everywhere. And then I did let that dry and shook it off once it was all dry. And then I'm going to come in with that double-sided score tape again. I really need to buy another inch one because the 2-inch one I like, or I think it's a little over 2 inches. And so I think it might be a 2.5 inch. So I can't fit 2 of them really great on the back of a card front. And so I should probably get a smaller one. And yes, there's my little action wobbler. And then I brought in some Tim Holtz mummy cloth to add a little bit of an embellishment to the top of this one. And I didn't want it to hinder my action wobbler there, so I had to be a little bit more careful with it and tying it off to the side to make sure that it stays out of the way for my little action wobbler. And then I cut those down fairly short here because, again, I don't want them to get in the way of the action wobbler. And then I just made sure I mummied them or roughed them up a little bit. And I did totally try to just steal some of the ink from my background. It didn't work as planned. So I just went in with whatever was left on those distress brushes and kind of added a little bit of color to my mummy cloth there. And then for the inside, I'm going to go in with that sentiment block stamp. I guess it's like a background sentiment stamp. And I did it in Hickory Smoke. I probably should have grabbed pumice stone instead. It was a little darker than I wanted it to be, but it was all right. I make it work in the end. And then I'm using that other one that says, I can't remember which one I ended up using here. We'll stamp it and I'll let you know. I'm going to practice it just to make sure. Oh, it says, so you're telling me a monster made the smash? And of course I did not get it on there straight. It's a little crooked. I'm okay with it. It's a monster card. And then I'm going to bring back in that little mummy critter from Tim Holtz's Stampers Anonymous set. And I'm just going to selectively ink the top part of him. And I'm going to use that as my mask there because I don't want to totally undo this one. And I didn't get the rest of the footage on this one. I do end up, because I liked it, but that gray was just a little bit too dark and you couldn't see the mummy head a whole lot or very well. So I did go back in with my brush and I colored out, added some water, you know, to activate that ink and just kind of color it in. I will show a picture of that in my close-up clips here. And there is my mummy card for my Creeping on Halloween, December 2022. Make sure to click the subscribe button so you can be alerted when new videos go up on the channel. If you do not, I will be doing a Halloween card every month at the end of the month. So there's that inside. I hope you had a great one. This one was so fun to do, and I will see you next time. Keep getting inky.